I want to pivot to Gaza really quick because we do have breaking news about Gaza as well. This is interesting. It was announced that Trump and Netanyahu's two-state vision, Gaza's war ends, Abraham Accords expansion. And I just want to go right to this part right here where they kind of break it down, what this would entail. So they are calling this the Gaza peace plan, but everybody pay close attention to these principles here. They reached consensus on these fundamental principles in general terms. They plan rapid implementation, beginning with Gaza warfare termination. Now, a lot of people just saw that part, but they didn't read these steps. So, one, Gaza hostilities will conclude within 2 weeks. Ending conditions will encompass 4 Arab nations, including Egypt, the UAE, to administer the Gaza Strip, replacing the murderous Hamas terrorist organization. The remaining Hamas leadership will face exile to other countries while the hostages gain freedom. 2, multiple nations globally will accept numerous Gaza inhabitants seeking immigration. Now, I'll get back to that in a second. 3, Abraham Accords expansion will bring Syria, Saudi Arabia, and additional Arab and Muslim countries to recognize Israel and establish official relationships. 4, Israel will declare its willingness for a future Palestinian conflict resolution under the two states concept, contingent upon Palestinian Authority reforms. And 5, the U.S. will acknowledge limited Israeli sovereignty implementation in Judah and Samaria. I just pivot back to number 2. I think people need to pay attention to what this says here, that multiple nations globally will accept numerous Gaza inhabitants seeking immigration. So the Palestinian people have said over and over again that Gaza is their home and they don't want to leave their home. So they're making this kind of sound like this would be a volunteer thing if you volunteer to leave. I don't think there's a such thing as voluntary displacement. I think what's going to happen, to me, this sounds like ethnic cleansing. I don't think they're going to get to choose whether or not they want to go. I think they're going to be sent to different countries. So I'm curious to get your perspective about this Gaza peace plan. I think we'll go to Scott first.
First of all the components are known to us. None of this is new. If you remember when Trump first talked about depopulating Gaza and turning into a giant Vegas-style beachfront casino property, suddenly there is an emergency meeting in Cairo, and Egypt and the United Arab Emirates and other countries came forward and said, we have an alternative. And you remember Rubio saying, what Trump was putting on was just an offer, or a proposal. Now there's a counter proposal, and now we begin to talk. Well, this incorporates the counter proposal, whereas they're going to turn control of the Gaza Strip over to this consortium of Arab nations. The voluntary displacement is just a reflection of, American-driven reality, which is if you're going to try and rebuild the devastation of Gaza, people can't be living in a neighborhood that's being razed to the bottom and rebuilt, which is, I guess, the vision of it. And so where do the people go? And, Trump doesn't want to, the Israelis want to get them out so that they don't come back. Trump is trying to disguise this as humanitarian. Well, we rebuild their land. We need to replace. The bottom line is just build a big damn refugee camp. These people are used to living in refugee camps. If they know that freedom's down the road, they'll live in refugee camps for 5 more years if they have to, if the knowledge is that they'll get back to a rebuilt nation. But that one, I think, is going to be negotiable. That's just Trump's, that's him holding on to the final vestiges of his initial proposal, and also the Israeli requirement of depopulation. But it looks like they're moving to make Gaza part of an independent Palestine. And as such, the people of Palestine will, I believe, through compromise, be allowed to stay there. But, that's part of the negotiation. the rest of it, I mean, look what they're asking. They're asking the Palestinians basically to give up the West Bank for large swaths of the West Bank. Reform of the Palestinian Authority just means that they need somebody like Abbas who's less corrupt but more pro-Israel. It's a total capitulation on the part of Palestine. And I'm just like what I said earlier about the Iranians. I mean, it's not my place to tell the Palestinians what is acceptable to them or what isn't. But we have to respect that they have a right to say no if they don't like any of this. And I have yet to meet a Palestinian who would think anything about this deal other than getting Israel out of Gaza was good. But again, we come back to what I said about the president in Iran. This is a checkbook operation. This is Donald Trump's way, bringing in, opening up his checkbook. What do I have to write? What number do I have to put down on here to make all these problems that have haunted the region for decades go away, as if it was always only about money? I mean, Trump world right there. Apparently he thinks it's only about money. What's his solution to Ukraine? Big land deal, that mineral deal, money. We're going to make money and everything's going to be great. No, Mr. President, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And Gaza, I think, is a hell of a lot more complicated, stupid extension of the Abrams Accord.
There's another side of it too, and it's like the France, Germany, the U.S., and whoever, von der Leyen, whoever will get together, and they'll negotiate a plan for the end of Ukraine. Oh yeah, well, all you got to do is this. Now let's take it to the Russians, and the Russians are like, you ain't negotiating a plan if we ain't in a room, right? It's the same kind of thing. Let's sit down. How many people are Palestinians or leadership that is in the room? None. You know what I mean? The people who are genociding them, Netanyahu's people, I guarantee they're in the room. The people who are sitting on their butts doing nothing or being complicit in the Gulf states, they're in the room. Oh, yeah, we'll throw in $30 billion. What are they? $30 billion. They got that, most of them laying under their sofa in change. That's pennies to them, right? So you're going to have the people who either turned their backs on them or killed them or sat over here and sent the weapons over to blow them to hell and say they all get a seat at the table to come up with a plan and then give it to the Palestinians and expect the Palestinians to sign it. Justice says you need to bring the Palestinians in, their leadership, have a discussion with reasonable people, bring in countries and representatives from countries that are considered neutral, maybe that both sides can agree this country's neutral. Or I was involved in lawsuits before where you would have a group of people that were going to be like on a little committee, and the plaintiff would say, I picked two people, the defense say, I picked two people, and then both of them together and agree on one person. So you come up with a group of people that is, everybody's happy. We got a group of people to work on this. And then you have good representation. You come up with a plan. But this business about, they're offering Iran a plan. Hey, we've got a plan, Iran. Why don't you take this? Instead of saying, let's sit down and work with them or whatever, they're going to offer them a plan. You either take it or we punch you in the face. And that's what it sounds like. Hey, we're genociding you. Here's a plan. Well, what happens if we don't take the plan? We're going to keep genociding you. These people are insane.
That's it, and that's the point I wanted to bring up as well, Garland. This idea that, first of all, Hamas did not agree to this. This agreement is between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. I'm pretty sure Hamas would not say yes to this. But the other Arab nations, why don't they say, okay, here's the thing. We will agree to a deal with you where the Palestinian people are not removed, where they get to stay in Gaza. But this whole idea of, well, we'll send them to other countries, because the reality is they're not going to be able to come back, and there isn't going to end up being a Palestinian state. I could just see this now, like down the road. They tell them to leave so that we can rebuild, and you'll get to come back when the rebuilding's done. And then they don't get to come back. And so there is no Palestinian state, and Israel takes over that land.
Voluntarily, the ones who voluntarily they'll voluntarily relocate again, just like the people who are voluntarily relocating to El Salvador. You ain't coming back.
This was written by a New Yorker who's used to going down to his condo in Florida while they're redoing an apartment in New York City. Hey, honey, we're going to get a new roof and get a new floor. So why don't we just fly down to Florida and we'll hang out in Miami Beach for 4 months while the contractors come in and they fix up the New York apartment. That's who wrote this stupidity. Yeah, we'll just get the Palestinians to like go to their voluntarily go to their Florida condos while
go to the Hamptons. We'll send them to the Hamptons.
Go to the Cape. Yeah, I mean, this is ignorance.
But it was obvious people didn't read this, you guys. Like on social media, people were like, "Yay, they reached a peace deal," but they didn't read the article.
No. And if they did, Sabby, they don't understand this stuff. You know, half the problem of Gaza is that it's just theory to so many people, just numbers. We have the American people, you know, gosh, I don't want to say this because I'm just going to get, but I don't care. I don't care anymore. American people who look like me, I don't want to say anything, but it's like the old Sesame Street song. One of these things is not like the other. Can you guess which one? All right. So figure it out what I'm talking about, people. But people who look like me have a tendency not to give a rat's ass about people who don't look like me. We tend to not view their lives as being as important to us. I mean, you hear it all the time. They have lots of babies, as if it's just a number thing. You know, you don't think they who have the babies love their babies as much as we who have our babies? We dehumanize these people. We dehumanize them collectively. And so when we look at the horror that's happening in Gaza, I mean, look at how much sympathy people like me gave to the Israelis who lost 27 people in this big bombing campaign. But meanwhile, what wasn't being reported is that every day while Iran was hitting Israel, Israel was setting up Palestinians for assassination who were trying to get food at humanitarian distribution centers, dropping bombs, killing 50, 60 at a time, many of them women and children. But they're not looking like me. And so those lives don't matter. They don't count. We don't add them up. You really think the majority of Americans who read about Gaza, all they say is terrorists, and they buy into the Israeli thing? There's no civilians in Gaza. They're all terrorists. They all support Hamas. So the lives don't matter. This is why I get so angry, and this is why I have to stop coming on shows like this, because I just get furious at my fellow citizens. Where is your frickin' humanity? Where is your frickin' humanity? Where is your common sense? Where are the things, the norms and values we are supposed to collectively stand for? Because at the moment you tolerate anything that's happening in Gaza, and you say, well, that's justifiable. You're the problem, not the solution. They can read it, but they're not going to understand it because they have dehumanized the Palestinians to the extent where those lives simply don't matter. They don't equate the suffering. If you told somebody that you would be displaced or your neighbor, they say, oh my God, you can't do that. The harm it does to me. Talk to a family that has to move. My parents were military. We moved all the time, and we moved in the middle of the school year. Do you know how hard it is to take your kids out of a school in the middle of the school year, move them all around the world, and put them into another school? And I did that 7 times. Yeah, you know. Yeah. Okay. But you know how disruptive it was. How for a family, it's tough, and yet we're asking these people to displace their. We don't care. But if God forbid that we had to be inconvenienced one time to be torn from our house and sent across, man, we just don't use our brains. We don't use our brains. These Palestinians are human beings. They care about the same things we care about. They care about life. They care about their families. They care about the future. And we have to start treating them as human beings. And once we recognize that, ask yourself, would we tolerate what we're asking of them to be asked of us? The answer is hell no. You know it. Go to North Carolina when the hurricane came through, where we sit there and say, let's depopulate all of North Carolina. People say, no, that's their homes. They need to rebuild. You have to help them. Wait a minute. Why can we do that? Oh, I forgot, because the people in North Carolina look a lot like me. So, we treat them as human beings. But the people in Palestine, they're not humans. They're just statistics.
It's crazy that in 2025 we even have to say that. We have to remind people that, like, no, they're human beings too. One more question for you guys. Good one here, Malcolm. Sabby, can you ask Scott, and we'll ask Garland as well, if he thinks Mossad could have been behind the bombing on Russia through Ukraine, and did it have the same markings as the ambush in Iran? Good question.
No. I mean, I can go into greater detail on this, but the Mossad operation in Iran was 10 plus years in the making. It requires extensive knowledge of Iran. Remember, there's a lot of Iranian Jews who are in Israel, who are with the IDF. Their former chief of staff, senior military people were all Iranian Jews. They have extensive connectivity with Iran through the monarchists, through the MEK, through the Kurds. The Mossad doesn't have the same level of connectivity inside Russia that would be. Plus, Mossad has to be careful. People tend to forget. Vladimir Putin said something very interesting in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. He said, around 20% of Israel speaks Russian. And he said that means.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
20% of Israel are Russians. Yeah,
Israel speaks Russian. I was there in the 90s. I'm telling you, that when the Soviet Union fell, hundreds of thousands of Russian and Ukrainian Jews immigrated to Israel. In fact, the scandal was many of them weren't Jewish, but they were pretending to be Jewish, and they were paying off the local rabbis so they could come to Israel and get out of the former Soviet Union, out of Russia and Ukraine. But it skewed the demographics of Israel tremendously. It helped transition Israel into a right-wing state that hates Palestinians, because instead of the old school Israelis who had grown up in the kibbutz and understood the Palestinians, people like Yitzhak Rabin, you started getting in these European transfers who hated the Palestinians, were extraordinarily racist, and it skewed everything. But Putin said, 20% of Israel speaks Russian. And he said that means that Israel is an extension of the Russian nation. So I think that answers the question right there. Israel and Russia are far closer together than many people think. That's why Netanyahu is always calling Putin, always talking to Putin, and that's why Putin's always calling him and talking to him. And it might be one of the reasons why the Iranians are a little bit reticent about going forward militarily with Russia. They've made a decision maybe to pivot to China, because at the end of the day, Israel is an extension of the Russian nation. Just ask the Russian president.
Yeah, and so you got a lot of Russians, and that's just something that the Russian government has to. For instance, people were saying, "Oh, you shouldn't do business deal with them," and they said, "Look, we've got so many Russian people who also have Israeli that travel back and forth. We've got to have a consulate. We've got to do business. We got to handle paperwork. We have no choice. We got to do that because so many of our citizens have dual citizenship." But of course, if you remember when the war first started in Ukraine. Zelensky was talking to the former Israeli prime minister, I forgot his name, saying, "Go talk to Putin. I want to make sure, find out if he's going to kill me." You remember that, Scott? Was
that Omer talking to Omer?
I think it was because any Israeli prime minister is going to have an open phone line at all times with Vladimir Putin at all times. See, you got to realize, like the really rich oligarchs, there's a lot of Russian Jewish oligarchs and Ukrainian Jewish oligarchs that have citizenship with Israel also. It's a political thing that, I mean, it's just a fact of life that if you're in Russia, and you're in power, you have to deal with that. You have to manage that. It can be a problem at times because of the U.S., and it can be an advantage at times. In the same way that they're going to, probably have some people spies there. I will guarantee you that the Russians have some people in Israel that are keeping an eye on things too, that are their spies. That's the way the game works. So everybody's doing what everybody does. There's a relationship that they have to have because of the cultural issues, and everybody's got to manage that. But there was an advantage. If you remember, what happened? As soon as the conflict started, Vladimir Putin said, "I was on the phone with the Israeli prime minister. I was on the phone with the Iranian prime minister." The one advantage he has is any conflicts in the Middle East, he can get on the phone with both sides. Gulf states, they love him. He can always get on the phone with both sides and manage the conflict. So that is actually, he's a very valuable resource for issues and conflicts in the Middle East. Go ahead, Scott. Sorry about that.
I was just going to highlight in 1997, I went to Kiev in October on a mission to meet with Kuchma, who is the president, his National Security Council, and the SBU, to try and convince them to stop a certain Ukrainian arms dealer who was dismantling former Soviet missile bases and things like that, and selling it on the black market, including trying to send it to Iraq. Very sensitive mission, extraordinarily sensitive at the time. No, here's the rest. You remember Paul Harvey?
Yeah.
And now for the rest of the story. You want to know how I got to Ukraine? I had to fly to Israel and then be put on a flight with a false identity to fly through Istanbul to Ukraine under Israeli cover. The Israelis are tighter than tight with everybody. At the same time that I was doing that there, trust me, I had the approval of the U.S. government and all this kind of stuff. I'm just saying that this, I'm not an Israeli asset. I was working for the United Nations, but that's how I had to get in there. The Israelis facilitated it. The Israelis collected the intelligence about the Iraqis using the Palestinian front in Moscow to tear down ballistic missiles and smuggle it in through Jordan into it. That was their connection with the Israelis are everywhere. They're everywhere. You move a rock and there's an Israeli intelligence agent. They're everywhere. I worked with the Israeli technical intelligence team and found out that they did really interesting things, like every expo. Those expos where like John Deere tractors. We're having a tractor expo in Timbuktu, Indiana. I could guarantee you there's a Israeli technical intelligence team there operating, finding out who's buying what's doing what, talking about this. They're everywhere. And that's the kind of influence they have. They're literally, you can't move a stone without having
I'm looking around too. Sorry.
Oh, look, I already know. The other day, it's a true story. A couple of days ago, people will know. I was doing my show, and like 80% of the way through, I said, "Oh yeah, by the way, did you hear that an Iranian missile struck a Mossad headquarters and the Mossad chief was killed?" Right? And I'm like, "Yeah." And in fact, let me show you. It was like going all over the place, right? I'm like, and as soon as I went to click, my sound went out. And everybody's like, "Oh boy, I think we know what happened." And I brought it up, and everybody's like, "No sound, Garland, no sound." There was nothing I could do to bring the sound back up. And I thought, okay, maybe I'm just being paranoid, but it sure is interesting. Anybody can look at the video. And as soon as I said, yeah, the Mossad chief was killed. So yeah, they're everywhere. They're right here. They're all around right now. It wouldn't shock me. They're all over it. Google just hired a bunch of Unit 8200 people who owns YouTube. So come on.
Interesting. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.